Hey everybody, welcome to the Liberty Cast. Thanks for checking us out. We have a loaded show for you this week. We're going to go through some of Joe Biden's gun policy and answer the question of why we think the left is against the Second Amendment. You and I know it's obvious to us, but that question was asked this week, so we're going to answer it. And of course, we're going to talk about the debate and the fallout afterwards. It doesn't sound like a lot, but it is a lot to unpack, and if we have time, there are a few other stories I want to touch on, so we will get to all of that straight ahead. But first, let me just express well wishes for the President and the First Lady and everyone in their inner circle who has been diagnosed with the Chinese coronavirus. We're sending up prayers for their swift and complete recovery, and for all of the leftists who wish death on the president and express glee at his diagnosis. You are sick, twisted, evil individuals. As much as I couldn't stand Obama, I never wished ill on him as a human being. Shame on all of the blue check Twitterati, talking heads in the media, and all of the no-name nobody leftists in my social media feed. You're all disgusting. So with that, let's press on. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Joe Biden's gun policy is the stuff of nightmares. And yeah, that might be a little over the top, but it still would be a disaster if he wins, which is even more of a concern now with the president's Kung flu diagnosis. Oh, stop. I don't care. China did it, and I will call it what I want. Anyway, if Biden were to win and we are not able to hold the Senate, they will pack the court so that they can get more activist judges on the bench and declare every conceivable gun control measure constitutional. He's going to have a Robert Francis O'Rourke in his administration, and we know where he stands on gun control. And his vice president, Kamala Harris, she will be the de facto president and is on record being willing to send the police to people's homes to take their guns. The gun safety page on his website is long, but you can imagine what's on it. Pretty much the same laundry list of unconstitutional infringements that every leftist wants to enact. But I'm just going to go through a few of them right now. I'm not going to link to Biden's website from mine, but it's joebiden.com/gun safety if you want to go there and read it for yourself. And I encourage you to do that. Of course, he wants to reinstate the assault weapons ban, implement a gun buyback program. I mean, you can't buy something back you never owned. It's a compensated confiscation program. But anyway, he wants universal background checks and to repeal the Protection of Lawful Commerce in Arms Act. Disastrous. But some of his more sinister plans, not that they're unique to him, like I said, it's a leftist wish list of anti-constitutional pablum, but some of the other things that really stick out. He wants to prohibit people from building their own firearms. So no more 80% lowers that you mill and finish yourself. No more buying all the different parts, including finish lowers, and putting it all together yourself. Nope, that's done under a Harris-Biden administration. Any semi-automatic AR platform rifles are going to be regulated under the NFA. So if you want to buy an AR-15, you will have to shell out the same kind of money as you would if you wanted to buy a Tommy gun. It's just ridiculous. And he wants to implement smart gun technology, which is just ridiculous. And no gun owner would ever allow themselves to rely on technology. You have to reboot or turn off and back on again in order to protect yourself in a life or death situation. It's as unworkable as microstamping, and California is bent on doing that. And we can do a whole show on smart guns and microstamping, and maybe we will expand on that in the coming weeks. But he also wants to ban online sales of guns and ammunition. But to buy a gun online, you have to go through the same background check as you would if you bought it in a brick and mortar store. Because you have to go to a brick and mortar in order to complete the transfer of a gun you buy online. It's like all these proposals. It's just dumb. Dumb. But the last one I wanted to talk about is that he wants to reinstate a rule from the Obama administration that Trump overturned. See why executive orders are not always a good thing? But he wants to reinstate the rule where if someone is receiving benefits from the Social Security Administration, they can have that person's guns taken away if they are adjudicated to be unfit. I use the air quotes because there's no actual adjudication taking place in a court of law. It's whatever the SSA says is unfit. Now, the SSA rule is more narrowly crafted than the similar rule at the VA. It does state that if the person is receiving benefits as a result of a mental disorder, they can take the guns away, and the person can petition to have them given back. But there's nothing in the rule specifying whether the mental health issue that the person is dealing with makes them more or less prone to violent behavior should be taken into account. But considering how it wasn't done in a court of law, there's nothing binding the SSA or mandating that they must give this person their property back. There's nothing constitutional about this at all. Now, there were a few other stories I wanted to get to, like a study on age restrictions as they relate to homicides and Hawaii's ridiculous gun legislation, but that went long, and I could spend 2 or 3 whole shows going through Sleepy Joe's gun agenda. But I wanted to talk about this story for a minute, and I feel like this is important. A 78-year-old grandmother came face to face with a home invader and held him at gunpoint. Her dog was barking, so she went and investigated, opened the door, and found the guy standing there. So she held him at gunpoint until the police came. Now I'm going to play some of the video, but pay attention to what she says in the middle and at the end.
At the moment, I was scared to death. I really was.
Sandy from Spanaway knew something was wrong when Boo Boo started barking nonstop Sunday night. The next thing the grandma knew, she was face to face with someone breaking in.
I opened my door, and standing right 2 feet from me was a man, and we looked at each other for a few minutes, and he turned and started to leave. And I said, "Oh, no, you don't. You stay right there." And I reached over and got my shotgun, and I cocked it. And I told him to stay right there because he was going to turn and walk away. Told him to go out, sit on the steps. I followed him out. And when he got to the bottom step, I told him to sit down. And I just stood here with the shotgun waiting for the police to come. I was totally calm, really and truly. I thought, this is amazing. I said, I've got grandchildren your age.
And the grandmother asked why he broke in, alarmed by some of his answers.
He said, "Well, I was really hoping to get laid." That perked my ears up. That made me think, oh my God.
Pierce County deputies came and arrested the suspect and say it's thanks to Sandy's quick thinking and bold actions. She's just grateful no one was hurt.
After he was so meek and mild and sat down like I told him to do, empowering. I felt like, at least I was in charge. I wasn't afraid.
Can you imagine? He was hoping to get laid, and she felt empowered and in charge. A gun is a great equalizer. Unless she was Cynthia Rothrock or Ronda Rousey, this 78-year-old lady had no chance against a man who wanted to do her harm. But because, had she not had that shotgun, who knows what would have happened? And I'm glad she never has to find out. But it's stories like this that are part of the reason why my wife started Carry Girl. In fact, this shirt that I'm wearing, and all the ones that you see me wear on the show were designed by her. We'll be making these available for sale soon, but head on over to carrygirlgear.com and check out her story and her designs. I think you'll like it. Charlemagne, host of The Breakfast Club, had Louisiana Congressman Cedric Richmond on as a guest. It was typical leftist ridiculousness. But towards the end of the interview, Charlemagne asked him how many guns he owned.
I have one gun, and I'm looking at purchasing another. And the unfortunate part is I saw a movie the other day, and I just decided that, you know, with the chaos going on, the firearm that person had that I want. So,
what kind of firearm was this? Was it a Desert Eagle or 40 caliber? What was it?
No, there's two that I want. One is the Judge. I don't know if you've ever seen it. It's a handgun. It's a revolver that can shoot either a 45 bullet, or it could shoot, I think, a 401 shotgun shell. And that way, if you're home, I just go back to that scene in Boys in the Hood where Lawrence Fishburne shoots straight through the front door. If you're coming in my house, I'm going to assume that you are a foe, and I don't want to necessarily have to be aim the best. So that revolver with shotgun shells in it, I think will
spreads,
trick.
Okay, first off, the Judge shoots 45 long Colt and 410 shotgun shells. If you're going to buy a gun, you should have some idea of what it is you're talking about. But that's not the worst part. If it was, I could overlook that. That's okay. But then he followed that up with shooting through the door, Boys in the Hood style. And you really think that because it shoots shotgun shells, you don't have to aim it? Aim isn't a consideration? If you take your shooting advice from movies, you're a fucking moron. It just shows that he knows nothing about gun safety, because one of the first and most important things you learn in a gun safety class is that you need to identify your target and know what's behind it. Just listen to this.
Why do people think Democrats are anti-Second Amendment?
I don't know. Look, the best hunter and shooter in Congress is a guy named Benny Thompson, a black guy from Mississippi. And Benny might have 20-something guns, and they range the gamut, but he is the best shooter. And so I don't know why people assume that we're not for the Second Amendment. But, you know, everything has limits. You can't have a bazooka. I mean, it'd be probably cool to own a bazooka, but you can't. And so you can't have an M16. So at some point, weapons are weapons of mass destruction, not the Second Amendment. And think about this. When they wrote the Second Amendment, there was no such thing as an AR-15. There was no such thing as an M16. So the framers of the Constitution were not talking about guns that could cause that much carnage in such little time. So, you know, I don't know why, but to have some reasonable gun reform, like closing the Charleston loophole, where this kid sat in that church and he said the people were so nice to him that he had second thoughts before he murdered them. And you mean to tell me we can't just, if your background check doesn't come back in 72 hours, you have to have that gun? Well, let me just tell you something from my neighborhood. The person who needs a gun immediately is the person that shouldn't have a gun.
Where do I begin? Charlemagne asked a good question, but the answer is obvious, because they've told us that they are against the Second Amendment.
Hell yes, we're going to take your AR-15, your AK-47.
So to gun owners out there who say, well, a Biden administration means they're going to come for my guns.
Bingo. You're right if you have an assault weapon.
What would you do about the millions of, specifically, assault weapons that are already in circulation? What do you do about those?
We have to have a buyback program, and I support a mandatory buyback program.
Now, just because a leftist owns guns doesn't mean they want you to have them. So the first part of his answer is just ridiculous. And then the next part shows his ignorance. If you have enough money and you go through the process and paperwork, you can own a bazooka. You can own an M16. It's not easy and it's not cheap, but you can. And weapons of mass destruction, seriously, The FBI defines weapons of mass destruction as a destructive device such as an explosive or incendiary bomb, rocket, or grenade, a weapon that is designed to cause death or serious injury through toxic or poisonous chemicals, a weapon that contains a biological agent or toxin, or a weapon that is designed to release dangerous levels of radiation or radioactivity. No firearm fits this definition, so I think that'll just about cover that ridiculousness. And I have debunked this so many times in print on the website and here on the show, but let me just go through it again for the cheap seats. The founders fought a war against the British with the same weapons that the British government had. And this notion that they didn't have weapons that could cause that kind of carnage is steeped in ignorance, dripping with it. The Girandoni repeating air rifle was available back then, and a pretty advanced weapon system for that time. There was the pepper box pistol, which was introduced in the 15th century. There was the puckle gun, which was a precursor to the Gatling gun. Not only were the founders familiar with these weapons, they liked these guns. The only reason they didn't employ them was that they were too expensive. They were too expensive to equip an entire army with them. The founders absolutely envisioned advances in weaponry and welcomed it, and still wrote the Second Amendment. And try telling Carol Bound and her family that she didn't need a gun immediately. She had a restraining order against her violent ex and was waiting for the police chief in her town to get off his ass and grant her permission to exercise her constitutional right to protect herself. That piece of paper didn't protect her when her ex-boyfriend showed up and attacked her in her driveway as she was getting out of her car and stabbed her to death. Representative Richmond just proved why we say that Democrats are against the Second Amendment. Because they are. Okay, let's move on to the silverback gorilla in the room, shall we? Now, we already talked about the president's diagnosis, but let's get into the debate and the firestorm fallout that ensued. I think we can all agree at this point that it was a crap show. It wasn't a complete disaster for Trump, or even for Biden for that matter. The president was his normal bombastic self and interrupted Biden a bit too much for my liking. And he went to a couple of places that I thought would have been better left alone. But overall, I thought he did enough to slightly edge out Biden in that first debate. Biden, on the other hand, had such a low hurdle to clear that the fact that he didn't drool on himself or fall asleep was pretty much a win for him. The true loser that night was the American people. You all know that I support Trump, but contrary to what some of my leftist friends think, I don't blindly just accept the things that he says and does. I will call him out when I think he's wrong. Unlike leftists who swallow everything that their candidates say and do, hook, line, and sinker. And once again, they accuse you of doing the very thing that they're doing. Now, as far as the interruptions go, I said that he did it a bit too much. But at the same time, the way Wallace was moderating, it was pretty much the only way he was going to get Biden to answer any questions or score any points against him. Of course, I don't think Biden answered any questions that night, at least not the ones that were asked by Wallace, which is another classic leftist maneuver. Answer the question you want to answer rather than the one that was actually asked. Although he did pretty much flat out refuse to answer a very important question about packing the Supreme Court.
If Senate Republicans go ahead and confirm Justice Barrett, there has been talk about ending the filibuster or even packing the court, adding to the 9 justices there. You call this a distraction by the president, but in fact, it wasn't brought up by the president. It was brought up by some of your Democratic colleagues in the Congress. So my question to you is, you have refused in the past to talk about it. Are you willing to tell the American people tonight whether or not you will support either ending the filibuster or packing the court?
Whatever position I take on that, that'll become the issue. The issue is the American people should speak. You should go out and vote. You're in voting now. Vote and let your senators know how strongly you feel. Vote now.
Are you going to pack the
Make
court?
sure you, in fact, let people know
He doesn't want
you're a
to answer the
senator.
question.
I'm not going to answer the question
Why
because
wouldn't you answer that
because
question?
the question
You want to put a lot of new Supreme Court justices, radical left.
Will you shut up, man?
Listen, who is on your list, Joe?
This
Who's
is
on your
so
list?
right.
Gentlemen, I think
this
we've
is
ended
so
this.
He's going to pack the court.
We have
He's not going to give a list.
We have ended this segment.
I said while I was live tweeting that not answering is in fact an answer. And then he went on to answer it. And he is 100% behind packing the Supreme Court. He had the nerve to say that he was the Democrat Party. Please. They're letting him think that. But remember this.
What would be the main issue? You think it's climate where he needs to be more progressive, or is there another one that you think is at the top of the list?
You know, I think overall, we can likely push Vice President Biden in a more progressive direction across policy issues.
He's not calling any shots. I bet his wife was the one putting the lid on his campaign at 9:30 every morning. But you heard earlier where he called Trump a clown and told him to keep yapping. His base loved that. Leftists on social media thought it was the greatest thing. Not a disaster for him at all. Our political discourse has gone severely downhill, and his base loved it. People like to blame Trump for this, but I think the decline in this level of political discourse predates Trump. He's just the logical extension of that decline. Biden said a couple of things that were demonstrably untrue and frankly puzzling. Some of it was all in that same segment, but first there was this.
You had never called for the leaders in Portland and in Oregon to bring in the National Guard and knock off 100 days of riots.
They can, in fact, take care of it if he just stay out of the way. Look here.
Oh, really?
Here.
That's just not true. The president offered to send in the National Guard to take care of these riots, and the governors and mayors declined those offers. He's staying out of the way at their request. But here's the other one that was even more ridiculous.
Antifa's an idea, not an organization.
Oh, you got it.
Not militia.
Antifa is an idea, not an organization. Whatever drugs they're giving him must be pretty good, because that's just stupid. This disaster of a debate led to the possibility of new rules where the moderator could cut off the president's mic. He should not agree to that. The next debate moderator actually interned for Biden. Now, you mean to tell me that there wasn't anyone at any of the other networks that didn't have personal ties with Biden or his campaign? There was no one they could pick, so they picked a former Biden intern? They're not even trying to fake the funk anymore. There's more for us to get into, but first we're going to take a quick break. I'm going to go on about this because it spilled over onto social media. Now, that Antifa clip I played was at the end of a controversial exchange that they had, so I'm going to go ahead and play that right now.
You have repeatedly criticized the vice president for not specifically calling out Antifa and other left-wing extremist groups. But are you willing tonight to condemn white supremacists and militia groups and to say that they need to stand down and not add to the violence in a number of these cities, as we saw in Kenosha and as we've seen in Portland?
Sure,
are you
I'm
prepared
willing to do
specifically
that, but
do it?
Well, go ahead, sir.
I would say almost everything I see is from the left wing, not from the right wing.
So what are you saying?
I'm willing to do anything. I want to see peace.
Then do it, sir.
Say it. Do it. Say it.
Do you want to call them What do you want to call them? Give me a name. Give me a
White
name.
supremacists and
Who would
white
you like me to condemn?
White supremacists and right
Proud
militia.
Boys, stand back and stand by. But I'll tell you what. Somebody's got to do something about Antifa and the left.
President Trump is not a racist. He didn't blow a dog whistle for the Proud Boys or any such organization. He said he didn't even know who the Proud Boys were. Of course, he went on to denounce them the next day, I think, which is a mistake when you don't know who they are or what they stand for. But putting that aside for the time being, I have to say that the people who keep calling out these so-called dog whistles are the only ones that can hear them. I had someone try to educate me on dog whistles, but all they could muster was Wikipedia, some other left-wing rag that wanted me to pay to read their nonsense, Salon, and some other ridiculous rag that no one reads. But nothing in those articles pointed to anything concrete. They gave a few anecdotes about how Republican politicians have been blowing racist dog whistles for decades. But again, it's how they interpreted those comments. It's what they want to see and hear. And Trump's record on race goes back decades. No one ever called him a racist until he came down the escalator in 2015, even after the Central Park 5 fiasco. Now, I didn't pay much attention to that as I was in boot camp when that went down, so my concerns were on other things. In fact, I don't even think I saw a newspaper or a TV until I got to my tech school. But anyway, no one accused him of being a racist. His comment, "stand back and stand by," was most likely a poor choice of words during a chaotic exchange between him and his two debate opponents. But of course, hysterical leftists seized on that, and that one utterance while ignoring this.
Racism is evil, and those who cause violence in its name are criminals and thugs, including the KKK, neo-Nazis, white supremacists, and other hate groups that are repugnant to everything we hold dear as Americans. But you also had people that were very fine people on both sides. And I'm not talking about the neo-Nazis and the white nationalists, because they should be condemned totally. Well, we may be a nation divided on policies. We are a country that stands united in condemning hate and evil in all of its very ugly forms. We condemn in the strongest possible terms this egregious display of hatred, bigotry, and violence. It has no place in America. We must never ignore the vile poison of anti-Semitism or those who spread its venomous creed. With one voice, we must confront this hatred anywhere and everywhere it occurs. How many times do I have to reject? I've rejected David Duke. I've rejected the KKK, the Ku Klux Klan. I put it on Twitter last week. When I put out a minor message, everybody picks it up. Donald Trump just tweeted something very unimportant. Let me just explain. When I put out that I reject KKK and David Duke, nobody picks it up.
That's like looking at a picture of a supermodel on a bad hair day and saying she's ugly. It makes no sense. But nothing about the left ever makes any sense. But it's not just silly, uninformed leftists on social media. John Roberts, once a respected journalist on Fox, and I think he did actually practice journalism. But check this out and you tell me.
Kelly, if I could start off, I'd like to ask you for a definitive and declarative statement without ambiguity or deflection. As the person who speaks for the president, does the president denounce white supremacism and groups that espouse it in all their forms?
This has been answered yesterday by the president himself, the day before by the president himself on the debate stage. The president was asked this. He said, sure, 3 times. Yesterday, he was point blank asked, do you denounce white supremacy? And he said, I've always denounced any form of that. I can go back and read for you in August 2019, in one voice, our nation must condemn racism, bigotry, and white supremacy. In August of 2017, racism is evil, and those who cause violence in its name are criminals and thugs, including the KKK, neo-Nazis, white supremacists, and other hate groups. I have an entire list of these quotes that I can go through with you. He has condemned white supremacy more than any president in modern history.
Just to clear it up this morning, can you, naming it, make a declarative statement that that the president denounces it?
I just did. You're contriving a storyline and a narrative.
I'm just asking you to put
He
this
said,
to rest.
I just did. I read you all of the quotes, and if you need to see them in writing, I will put them in an email. Paula.
So can you right now denounce white supremacy and the groups that espouse it?
I just did. The president has denounced white supremacy, the KKK, and hate groups in all forms. He signed a resolution to that effect. The president just last week expressed his desire to see the KKK prosecuted as domestic terrorists. His record on this is unmistakable, and it's shameful that the media refuses to cover it.
Asked and answered. But it didn't end there, because I guess he took a beating on Twitter after that ridiculous display. And this was his reaction.
And for all of you on Twitter who are hammering me for asking that question, I don't care, because it's a question that needs to be asked. And clearly, the president's Republican colleagues a mile away from here are looking for an answer for it, too. So stop deflecting. Stop blaming the media. I'm tired of it.
All right.
Even if you think the reaction on social media is unfair, that is not the way to handle it, because now you come off as a petulant child, which is how these uninformed leftists who only watch CNN and MSDNC anyway sound. I actually had someone tell me that they only knew of one time when Trump kind of half-heartedly renounced racism. You must really hate the president to paint him as a racist based on that one comment, while ignoring decades-long Biden's record of actually being a racist, making racist statements and eulogizing an actual white supremacist and calling that person a mentor and friend. All right, let's move on. Rowan Sweeney. Is anyone going to say his name? And who is he, you ask? Rowan Sweeney is a 4-year-old victim of a mass shooting by a black man in Struthers, Ohio, and this took place on September 21st of this year. The shooter just walked into the home and opened fire, killing Rowan and wounding 4 others, including his mother. Nothing in the reporting so far indicates that there was any connection between the shooter and the victims. So right now it seems to be a crime of opportunity. Now there could be more to it in terms of connections between the other victims and the shooter, but none of that changes the fact that a 4-year-old is dead. But this is just another example of the media trying to push a narrative. Because had this been a white man walking into a home and shooting up a house and killing a 4-year-old black kid, this would be the next riot-inducing case. But because a black man committed the crime, it warrants no mention in the media whatsoever. It's one of the many frustrating things that the leftist media, or the American media maggots, as my buddy BZ calls them, does. Now, this is on the heels of 5-year-old Cannon Hinnant's murder. And aside from me and a few others spreading it on social media, that story barely got any national attention. And by the time any national outlets did mention it, they gave the story a quick mention, and just like that, it was out of the news cycle. If you can even say it was ever really in the news cycle, which in itself is a sad commentary. Now, speaking of sad commentary, California Governor Gavin Newsom was full of contradictions the other day. On the same day that he vetoed a bill requiring high school students to take ethnic studies course in order to graduate, he signed a bill into law that established a task force to study how slavery reparations could be distributed. Now, I often talk about how the left's ideas and statements are incoherent, and this is incoherent to the nth degree, because he just signed a law earlier this year requiring ethnic studies courses for students at Cal State University. It almost makes me wonder if he's okay, because how do you sign that into law and not the one for high school students? Now, I shouldn't complain because it just means that there's less opportunity to indoctrinate the K through 12 kids. But first, let me talk about the bill that he vetoed. The curriculum laid out in the bill was very, very clearly based on the tenets of critical race theory, which we talked about last week. The model curriculum says that the goal is to, quote, build new possibilities for post-imperial life that promotes collective narratives of transformative resistance. What they're telling you is that they want to teach your children, from the first time they can get their leftist hooks into them, how to be radicals. That's it. And Newsom vetoed this. But it's going to come up again, and they will make some minor tweaks, and it will get signed into law. Now, normally I would say that it'll get signed unless we do something about it, but I think California is a lost cause. I know Dave Rubin and others want to stay and fight, but I think the political machine in California is just too far gone. It's going to have to collapse under its own communist weight before any sort of swing back to normality takes place. But like I said, he vetoed that bill, but then turned around and signed into law a bill to study reparations for slavery. Does he even know the history of his state? I mean, he must, but I don't get how anyone thinks that reparations makes any sense, especially in California, when you consider that it was never a slave state. California entered the Union in 1850 as a free state, and California's admission into the Union upset the balance between the free and slave states in the Senate, which ultimately led to the Civil War in 1861. So, given California's history, who's going to be eligible for these reparations? And how many black folks in California are descendants of people who were in California in 1850? And then again, there were no slaves in California. So what the hell are they even talking about? Come on. All right, it's time to get you out of here with some quick hits. Now, there was some explosive news in the Breonna Taylor case. So the grand jury audio and transcripts were released, and there was one bit of audio that makes the whole thing make a lot more sense to me.
He said something about there's a woman down inside. He said she was the one shooting. He said she had a 9mm. He believed a 9mm.
Wow. Now, one of the things that always bothered me, and I've said it on this show, was that the boyfriend had the gun and shot the officer, but Taylor was shot 8 times. And the boyfriend who allegedly had the gun came out of the situation unscathed. Now we see that that may not have been the case. And with that, it makes perfect sense now that Taylor would have been shot 8 times. Now there's 20 hours of audio, and I'm not going to commit to listening to it all. I'm just not. But when I get my hands on the transcripts, I will read them, and we'll see if there are any other nuggets of information that are important. Despite the left's glee in the president's diagnosis and blaming him for not wearing a mask, I stand by my statements that the masks are useless. The evidence that the ruling class believes this is everywhere for us to see. Pelosi, Fauci, reporters when they think the cameras aren't rolling, etc. But here's one of those politicos coming right out and saying it.
So Wendy, I'm going to take my mask off when I speak. So.
I will as well. I'm waiting so that we can do a little political theater.
Okay.
So that it's on camera.
Just like when Fauci said that the masks only serve to make people feel better. Political theater. And speaking of Glee, did you hear about Chris Rock's monologue on Saturday Night Live?
President Trump's in the hospital from COVID, and I just want to say my heart goes out to COVID.
Conservatives have always believed that leftists are largely decent people with terrible ideas, while they think that we are terrible people. But they are doing their best to make me think that they are terrible people. Conservatives expressed condolences for Ruth Bader Ginsburg's family on her passing. The left cheered when Scalia died. They said that Rush Limbaugh deserved his cancer diagnosis. And now they are celebrating the president and the first lady's kung flu diagnosis and wishing them death. They are the terrible ones. The New York Slimes, the Rolling Stone, ABC, CBS, all asked a federal judge in Kentucky to dismiss the suits against them by Nick Sandmann, claiming that their stories did not amount to defamation. Now, Judge William O. Bartlesman of the U.S. District Court for the Eastern District of Kentucky denied those motions to dismiss, saying that the media outlets should have vetted the stories for accuracy before publishing them. He wrote in his ruling, under Kentucky law, a writing is defamatory if it tends to bring a person into public hatred, contempt, or ridicule, cause him to be shunned or avoided, or injure him in his business or occupation. The allegations of the complaint fit this definition precisely. These outlets probably know what CNN and the Washington Post paid out in their settlements and want no parts of it. I think Sandman asked for $275 million or something like that from both of them. I hope he got close to that. I hope he got enough to make it hurt, and I hope he gets enough from these others to hurt them too, and maybe even put Rolling Stone out of business, which would be outstanding. Anyway, folks, that's our show. I will try to do better next time, but thank you all for watching or listening. If you're watching on Rumble, please take a second to hit that subscribe button so that you never miss an episode. If you're listening to the audio, check us out on Apple Podcasts, Spreaker, Spotify, or whichever podcast platform you prefer. And please like, subscribe, and leave us a review, preferably 5-star. Really appreciate that. Our website is thelibertycast.net. Go to the podcast page and you'll find all the latest podcasts there as well. We're also on therightway.site. And of course, you can find us on social media as well, Parler, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, at The Liberty Cast on all 4 of those platforms. And again, thank you all for taking some time to spend with me, whether you're watching or listening. So until next time, keep your head on a swivel and stay safe, everybody.